Welcome back, everyone, to conversation between Pastor Joe and Pastor Vinny. We've been doing this now for several weeks, so we're in a pretty good rhythm. And I wanted to start today by kind of picking up where we left off last week. You may recall that the question that we were discussing last week was, does everyone need therapy? Does everyone need to see a Christian counselor? And in phrasing the question that way, does everyone need therapy? In his first answer, Pastor Vinny said that he kind of had an aversion to the word therapy. And I've heard a number of Christians say that. And so what I wanted to do today was kind of start there and ask Pastor Vinny, why do a lot of Christians have a negative view toward psychology, or the word therapy in particular?
So much of psychology is an attempt to figure out man's problem apart from God and apart from the framework of the Bible. So I think that's probably one reason. Our spirits as Christians desire to have wise counsel, and we know that wise counsel can only come from God. So I think it makes sense that we would be standoffish to secular psychology.
Yeah, I think that that's true. And kind of ending there makes me want to ask another question, and it's one that I've received. It's one I would imagine a number of pastors have received, and that is, given that kind of mentality we sometimes have, would you, as a Christian pastor, would you ever recommend that a Christian see a non-Christian psychologist?
Yeah, I would first start off by saying I don't think everybody needs a professional. And so I would start by looking for someone in your church who has wisdom and years of experience behind them and knows the Bible well, maybe even someone without a title in the church. If you need help beyond that, then certainly I'd say, speak to the pastor or one of the church leaders. Sometimes those options are not possible, or we go and we try to get help and it doesn't bring a resolution. And so we need to keep going. Sometimes we don't have a choice but to look into secular counseling. Sometimes there's not a like-minded counselor in our area. There's certain areas of the country or certain areas of our globe where we may not be able to find someone who holds similar beliefs to us. So this is especially true if the area in which we need counsel is very specific, like someone has autism and they're trying to figure out what to do about that. They're on what we call the spectrum. Not a lot of people know how to help folks who are dealing with that. Another example might be trauma. If our trauma is very intense or very complicated, there may not be a Christian counselor in the area that may be able to handle that. So sometimes we can avoid secular counsel by looking outside of our area. There are people who do video calls or phone calls. And so that's sometimes an option, though what happens there is sometimes our insurance may not pay for us to see someone out of state, or the person in that state may have a problem with their licensing board, or a problem with the licensing board in our state might not allow them to see us. So sometimes that doesn't work. But so yes, there are specific cases where I might refer someone to secular counseling. They're very specific cases, and there's a bunch of questions I go through before I would say that. But yes, certainly there are cases that we would.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point, and your answer there kind of reminds me of something that I heard the Christian counselor David Pallison say in one of his books, and that kind of gets at just this sort of posture that Christians can sometimes have towards non-Christian psychologists, and what I was referring to is he pointed out in one of his books that just as every person has a worldview, it's obviously going to follow logically that every counselor, every psychologist is going to have a worldview. And so it's just important to remember that. I found that comment helpful, and it kind of reminds me of what you're saying there, which leads to one other question that I had, and we can kind of end there. And that is that how should Christians think about quote unquote, secular psychology or non-Christian counseling in general? Because do non-Christian psychologists and counselors have anything, do you think, that they can teach us as Christians? That's kind of what I'm trying to get at there.
Well, I would say that all truth is God's truth. And I've noticed where I was forced to study all these psychology theories in order to get the degree that I got, I noticed that every secular theory, somewhere in it, had a slice of the truth in them. And so there were things that I could learn from them. Now, there are some secular theories or psychologies that have quite a bit of overlap with Christian faith. There's a couple I can think of right off the bat that I'm researching now and using to help people. Tremendous overlap, and say very little that or nothing that would go against what we believe. And so a term here called spoiling the Egyptians might be helpful in that the Egyptians gave Israel tons of useful gifts when they left Egypt. And so secular psychology has gifts perhaps that it could give us. Maybe it's raised awareness of mental health issues in the last 50 years, helped us understand others better. And so I've heard other people say that when psychology is being descriptive, it's often helpful. It gives us words for our experience, for instance. It helps us categorize issues that people may be having. And in some cases, it helps us identify what we would call evidence-based approaches that are helping people. And then we can critique those with studies to see, is it actually helping people? Now, as Christians, we would say, what does it mean to help somebody might be different than what a secular person might. But we do find that there are certain approaches that tend to help people with certain problems. And psychology has helped us learn that. And, you know, I think we can learn from anyone. God used a donkey in the Bible once to teach us. God used Jethro, who's a non-Hebrew, to counsel Moses on how to care for God's people who were in conflict. So the key, I think, to spoiling the Egyptians, if you will, is taking any gifts that we receive and taking them into the wilderness like Israel did, and laying them before the Lord and asking him to teach us what we might use for his glory and what we might need to toss aside along the way.
Yeah, no, that's good. I think just to kind of wrap up here, two phrases come to mind for me, and that is that in Christian theology, we also talk about common grace. You know, that God gives grace to all people, whether they're Christians or not. And so, yeah, what you're saying is there is such a thing as common grace knowledge, right? That non-Christians can have, and we can learn something from them. So that's certainly true. And then the last thing is, you know, what you're saying is something that I've taught to Crossroads Community Church, and that is the importance of developing a Christian worldview. So whether we're reading a non-Christian author, whether it's a psychologist or not, you know, we might read a non-Christian counselor in a book, something that they've recommended, someone's recommended to us, and we work through that, or you know, a non-Christian philosopher, or maybe a non-Christian TV show, or you know, a radio program, whatever it is. The point is we want to develop the habit of sifting everything through the lens of Scripture. So that sounds to me like that's kind of what you're saying. So that if someone came to you with a particular problem, as you were saying, on those occasions where you might recommend that they see a non-Christian psychologist or specialist, anything that they're hearing, we would want to sift through the lens of Scripture. So
absolutely,
yeah, I think that's good.
We could spend a lot of time on the cautions,
right? Of course,
what you watch out for.
Right. Yeah, sure, absolutely. Yeah, that's good. So thanks once again, Pastor Vinny. If you're listening to this, if you're watching this video, and you have a comment for us, please leave it. And or if you have a question, another topic that maybe just something that you've always wanted to ask a Christian counselor, put it there, and we will tackle it. So thanks.
Thanks
Talk
for
to you soon
joining
again.